Welcome to Constant Variables, a podcast where we take a non-technical look at building and growing digital products. I'm Michael Roth. Let's get nerdy. Hello. If you're new to our show, welcome. And if you're a loyal listener, this voice probably won't sound too familiar. As you heard in the opening, my name is Michael Roth, and I'm really thrilled to be the new host of Constant Variables. I'm excited to be working alongside the show's producer, Jenny Karkowski, and editor, Jordan Doust, continuing to bring you tech content that's super easy to digest. If there's one thing I've learned being a fan of podcasts myself and attending networking events in the tech industry so far, there really are endless things you can learn from listening to others talk, especially if you get the chance to have a conversation with them. And if you've listened to even a handful of prior episodes, you would definitely recognize the voice of my first guest, though maybe not from the other side of the mic. Hey Tim, welcome to the show.
Hey Michael, thanks for having me.
Yeah. First off, I wanted to actually thank you for putting out over 100 episodes of awesome content on Constant Variables. I mean, even prior to working at JMG, I had listened to quite a few episodes, and now I've listened to the entire back catalog. Got some pretty big shoes to fill here.
Well, apologies that you had to spend all that time listening to my voice, and I did it all by myself. If you hear otherwise, Jenny, Jordan, they don't listen to them. They did none of it. 100% me.
Solo show here. That's all I've heard.
One man band. That's right.
Well, for those that maybe don't know you and haven't listened to the entire catalog like I have, would you be able to fill us in a little bit about your backstory and how it led to creating and hosting a podcast?
Well, those people think I'm a pretty big jerk now, I think. I got to win them back. So going, I don't even know where to start with this one. I think so as a kid, I listened to a radio station a lot called Radio Oz, and it was kind of like Radio Disney back. So maybe I'll take a step back further for you, Michael. Like, people used to listen to the radio sometimes for music. Believe it or not
only Spotify.
No, this was pre-Spotify days. You would just turn on the radio and just random music would be playing. And I always would hear DJs and thought, like, that is such a cool gig. And I would like sit in my room and pretend to be a DJ. And like, I had a talk boy from Home Alone 2. Like, I would record myself doing like intros and kind of segging between songs and stuff like that. And so I always thought like radio would be a really cool job. And then shortly after I had that realization, I've learned that radio is not a great job to have. Like, it's really most radio hosts will tell you that it's a slog. So I kind of had that as like a back of my mind career one day sort of a thing. And then fast forward to running my own business and being part of JMG. We were thinking of creative ways to stand apart from the crowd. And I'd been at this point long into podcasts. I'd been listening since 2004 to certain shows. And by this point, I think we started the show like 2016, 2015-ish. And I thought, if we put out a podcast and kind of built our own audience around who we thought would be good listeners that could ultimately, maybe ideally become customers at some point, that would be great. But on the other hand, it's also just kind of fun to flex your creative muscle in other ways. And so that's kind of what led to starting the podcast was, let's find a way to bring other voices out into the world that can, share what it takes to build mobile software. And at the same time, it gives me a chance to kind of flex my muscle of hosting this stuff and trying to see, how big of a show we could make.
Yeah, so a little bit of a passion project, and then also trying to answer kind of those questions that clients might have coming up to the JMG group as a really intuitive and interactive FAQ section almost.
Yeah. People synthesize information in different ways. Like, that's why you see blogs, you see YouTube videos, you see newsletters. There's all kinds of ways to get your message out. And I find that just having somebody in your ears, like there's something I don't know, magical is the wrong word, but like there's something that's just like you feel connected to a person when you just hear them in your ears every week talking to you. You develop a certain relationship with them, and that's kind of the beauty of having a podcast. You really can build trust that way.
Totally. I mean, as foreign as the idea of radio is to me, I still do prefer a phone call to a text conversation, so I could definitely understand that.
Well, that's why you're a sales guy. That's beautiful.
So as JMG has grown and changed, my experience with the clients, it's a pretty endless and wide variety to the group that you guys have served. How has that adjusted the trajectory for the podcast this far, or has it had any effect?
I would say that it's given us a much more diverse set of content. I mean, making podcasts, what's difficult is when you get through your first 20 or 30 episodes and then you're like, well, what else do I say? Or what else can I talk about? Having a diverse set of clients that they all have a similar thing in mobile technology, but they utilize mobile technology in so many different ways. And you can tell so many different stories just by having an eclectic clientele like, JMG does have. So I think it has served the podcast tremendously because we're able to, tell so many more stories of ways that people could use mobile technology in a way that is going to actually help them, sell their service or their product or move their business in the right direction just by utilizing that sort of technology.
Sure, that's actually really cool. Kind of the you guys haven't led the podcast, but the podcast has kind of followed the trajectory of JMG almost.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it.
Cool. So let's talk about your work at JMG for a little bit, which you're still a partner in, but not quite as involved in the day-to-day activities. What are some of the most memorable projects you had worked on at JMG?
Man, there's no project at JMG that I couldn't tell several stories about. Especially when you run the thing, you get so invested in all of the different work that comes in through the door. I think usually when people ask me what my favorite app was that I ever built, I think back to there's one project that we built with an inventor who was he was an engineer but didn't know software. So he was a really avid billiards player, and he ended up building this prototype for a cue ball that had an accelerometer that was powered by Bluetooth embedded inside of it. And what he wanted was an app that he could, practice his break shot. So you could hit the ball, and then using the accelerometer, you could detect the angle of entry, like what angle you're going to hit the racked balls in, and then also like the force that you use. Like you can determine all of that through your accelerometer, and then you can see it on the screen, so you can keep practicing and improve your break shot and all of that. And it never saw the light of day. I think I'm the only person that ever really even used it, but we had a really cool UI that one of our go-to designers, Paul Carroll, built, and it was just an amazing interface. It was so much fun to build. I think that's usually the one that I hold closest to my heart. But we've built so many cool products together as a team. Like you can't go wrong with Turn Signal. You can't go wrong with the Great Clips app. There's just really, I could just sit here all day and list off every single app because they all mean something to me.
Totally. Yeah. And with the business being your baby almost, that's very understandable.
Yeah.
That was a really cool selection though. Was the hardware and the cue ball with the accelerometer in it ever physically present?
So no, what I had was he built a prototype of it. So, he wasn't even in the state. Like, I think he was on the East Coast somewhere. And he shipped us, he shipped us like a Arduino and this was like when Arduinos weren't like accelerometers, like that cue ball sized. Like this was a relatively large, think of like a credit card sized platter that basically, it was funny to like trigger the accelerometer. You'd have to pick this, like, it might even have been like cell phone size. Like you pick up this brick and just slam it on the desk. And that's how you would trigger the break shot from happening is by just, so I was just beating the hell out of this like accelerometer thing to get it to move up and down. And yeah, but we never actually saw the cue ball. So I don't know, like we sent him the code and like, here you go. And I don't know whatever happened from it.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And the picture of you just slamming a cell phone against the desk while you try to code it's pretty entertaining to picture.
Frankly, that's every single app I've ever built is me slamming some sort of electronic device into the desk out of
At
frustration.
some point, it might fix it. You never know. Just knock a couple wires back together and you're set.
It's the old Nintendo, like just pull the cartridge out and blow on it and put it back in. It's there's all those hardware tricks.
Still got a Nintendo 64 hanging in the closet, so I do know what that one means.
I only got one in the office too, so.
Oh, that's right. So, when you're taking on a new project, what were some of the common objections that clients would bring up to you or misunderstandings you guys would run into?
I think the biggest one, well, price, I think is always first and foremost, like in any service industry, like people want to find a good price. And mobile software is not cheap. And a lot of times you'd get people like, I think what I noticed as kind of a general rule of thumb is the less specific you were about what your idea was, the less understanding you had of how expensive this stuff is to build. So like if somebody came to us and said, I want to build Uber for dogs, or I want to build Facebook for, whatever, like people would just have like 4 words of what they wanted the app to be. You would come back at them and say, that's going to be $250,000. And then they would promptly, walk away. But then if somebody came to you and said, I want to build an app that matches up doctors that are trying to trade call shifts, you kind of got a better idea of, at least these people understand what the pricing is. But even still, it's like you tell somebody that the entry to building mobile software is $100,000, which I think is a reasonable expectation to have. You're self-selecting at that point. So, I think price is probably the biggest objection that I noticed as I was trying to sell software.
Yeah, absolutely understandable. It can be tough too for some clients on that price objection because sometimes they're coming into it like the passion project with those cue balls you mentioned, and they want it just for them to make their life a little bit easier. And you don't necessarily think of the development cost or the business side of the app and how you might be able to easily pivot it to serve an entire market instead of just yourself. So sometimes price is a big objection, but then if you open that lens a little bit and let them see that there might be a alternative that could serve the entire market and still scratch that itch for them, it might open up an entire world of possibilities for them.
Oh, 100%. I think that's usually the first question I ask when I hear somebody wants an app is, how are you going to monetize it? And I think that is a illuminating question, because if you can't answer it as to how this app is going to provide value back for you, you're probably not going to get very far with your app. Like you have to at least have some way of determining the return on your investment. Because if it's a passion project, maybe you're going to sink your time into it, and that's totally fine. I have plenty of passion projects, but if I'm going to run a business and I'm going to try to make money off of this thing, like you got to know that you're in for, up front, you're going to be spending 6 figures, and then you're going to be continually having to invest in this product. Like it's not like you can just go and buy a house and then be like, well, we're done, never going to have to fix anything here. You're constantly having to add on to your house. You're constantly having to fix things that break. It's a constant investment. And that's the same with software, except the problem is, your house deteriorates at a much slower rate than software can deteriorate. So, just being eyes open going into it, like price is an objection, but you have to understand that it's this stuff ain't cheap.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know listening to previous podcast episodes, you have always touted that you are one of the worst app salesmen because you don't try to sell a project. You just try to kind of make sure it's going to be a good relationship and a good app going forward. Were there any projects, though, that were easier sells or harder sells, or easier to bring to production or harder to bring to production? Or is it kind of all revolving around that price point if they came in with a good mindset on that?
I think the more trust that I had with the client going into it, the easier the sale was. We had take Turn Signal, for example. I went to school with one of the founders. Like it was, I already had years and years of experience with this individual, and we he knew right off the bat when I reached out and said I can build mobile apps, like we had a trust factor instantly. So like that was very helpful. Then, you know, other apps that are a little bit harder of a sell, you know, like take Great Clips, for example. We had to really fight to prove ourselves that we could end up doing this, and we did, and it was a win-win for everybody. So, yeah. So I guess like with those two examples, like that's kind of our there's kind of a wide gap in there. I think, yeah, again, it really just like when it comes to a service business, like what JMG does, you really have to be able to establish that you are credible and that you can actually deliver on what you're promising. And part of that is, as you know, the service provider, we have gotten better at being able to tell right out of the gate who's a good client, because these relationships, they are relationships. Like it goes both ways, right? Like you have to trust us that we can actually do the work, but we have to trust you that you're going to be able to take the work we do and actually do something with it. Because there's nothing worse as an app developer than having an app take a year of your life and it doesn't go anywhere or do anything. Like that's just, it's brutal. So I think, yeah, I think as far as it goes, like establishing trust is probably the key factor of whether a sale is going to be easy or difficult.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. How often did JMG end up building apps versus just hopping in to fix them?
I guess it was a decent mix. I think we tended to get more of the greenfield, like build an app from scratch sort of thing, but it wasn't all that uncommon to inherit an app from somebody else.
And as a developer, did you really have a preference either way? Like, was it fun to be able to build up the project from the ground and kind of have your baby there? Or is it more interesting to try to solve and fix a puzzle that you get in front of you?
I think any human can, you know, whatever application you're going to be like if you're talking about like building a bridge, for example, nobody likes maintaining bridges, right? Like nobody likes maintaining roads, because the work,
Yeah.
like, and like go back to the house example, like every house that has DIY projects in it, you're like, who did this? This is dumb. Like, why would you put this here? Why would you put this, like, do these things? Like, and it's the same with software. Like you get into somebody's code and no matter how much they may like adhere to the standards of the system, you know, all of this stuff is like, it's math, and math can be done in infinite number of ways. Right. So I think
Yep.
there's some projects that we've inherited that are easier to jump in and continue working on because they were built by real professionals that had some sort of like once you can see a project that you've inherited has like some sort of structure to it, and you can kind of start to put yourself in the shoes of the original development team, then it's not too tough to adapt and keep going. But then there's some where you inherit it from maybe a less than professional shop, or it's somebody who kind of hacked on it on their side, and you look at it and you're like, this is awful, and we're going to just have to gut it and start from scratch. Like, you know, it really is like, and you know, honestly, it's not even like, there are some bigger companies that we've worked with that we inherited some pretty terrible code. And then there's some smaller projects that we inherited that were really, really well architected code. So it doesn't really matter. Like it doesn't seem to have any correlation to money or size or, you know, stature. It really comes down to just the original development team themselves, whether they were thinking ahead and thinking about somebody inheriting their code someday, or whether it's just like, we'll just put this out here and it works, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, your comparison to maintaining and discovering someone else's construction work just brought me back to helping renovate some family members' homes in the past. And as you peel back some of those walls and renovate some of the bathrooms, everything is not to code, and it just brought it to a really good light for me as a non-developer, non-technical person. It felt like a little bit of a silly question on the back end.
That's basically my new job title on LinkedIn, is an anecdotalist, because that's all I do is just tell analogies all day. So you're welcome.
Well, speaking of passion projects of yours, I know the Minnesota Craft Beer app is one. And for those who aren't familiar with it, would you be able to talk a little bit about it or why you built it?
Yeah. So at a high level, so Mincraft.beer is the domain name for it. It's basically an app that tracks all the breweries in the state of Minnesota, and you can check into them. And the whole purpose of it is to try to track your progress in going and visiting all of them. So the kind of the origin of the app was Rob and I used to really be into Leanne Chin, and we had like at one point we made this idea to like go to all of them, and it's not like, there's no difference between Leanne Chins, right? It's just like, and even like
100%.
the interior of these looks exactly the same. Like there's no difference, but we thought like, when we go, like we were going on sale calls together. And so like if we were in the North Metro and we were next to a Leanne Chin, it was like, it's cheap food and we were starving entrepreneurs, right? So it was good. But we printed out a map and like hung it on the wall of my basement where our office was. And as we would go to them, we would like put an X through them. So we did this for about a year. After a year, we realized that like some Leanne Chin locations had opened and some of them had closed. And we're like, all right, well, I guess we'll just like, let's just generate a new map. Like I was all set to go into Google Maps and like rebuild it. And then I thought like, wait, I'm an app developer. Like, why am I printing out a piece of paper to do this? So in like 3 hours, I whipped together a prototype that tracked all of the Leanne Chins. And like I fed in I actually went into Leanne Chin's website and like found all of their locations, like exported them as a JSON object, and I threw them into a database and I put it into an app. And I'm like, all right, we got our chin tracker. And like I went home to my wife that day. I guess I went upstairs. Our office was in my basement. We went upstairs and I was like so proud. I'm like, this is what I spent all day doing. Isn't this cool? And she's like, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard in my life. And like, what a colossal waste of time. Fast forward like a couple of days later, she was like, like her and I had a plan to get to every brewery in the state. And at that point there was only like 30 or 40. So it was like an attainable goal. And she was like, that Leanne Chin tracker that you built, why don't you turn that into breweries? And I'm like, all right, well, that's easy enough. So I just deleted the red background of Leanne Chin and I turned it into brown for beer app, and we loaded it in, and I'm like, hey, this is actually really useful. And so I thought like, well, we could actually like polish this up and ship it. So again, my friend Paul Carroll designed a fresh interface for it, and we threw it up in the App Store, and it's basically been sitting there for 5 years and haven't really done much to it since, other than keep the database live. So yeah.
Wow. So just kind of helping to update the new breweries that come in, but other than that, is the maintenance pretty minimal for you?
Well, we do need to get the Android version back up. I just haven't talked to Rob to get the keys to be able to to do that. But yeah, like we need to get the Android version back in the store. But yeah, I mean, I've been looking at adding some new features and doing some stuff to it. Like now that I've been hearing from people, like that's the coolest thing of this app is I go to different breweries all the time, and I pretty much every brewery I go in now, there's somebody sitting at the bar with the app open and they're checking into a brewery that they've just gotten to for the first time. So it's like, it feels good with, my wife now works at a brewery, and it's cool to support the brewery scene and try to encourage people to go and travel the state and see parts of the state of Minnesota that they have never seen before. And it's all thanks to my dumb Leanne Chin tracker. So
no, that is a wonderful iteration of that, and much more unique than separate Leanne Chin locations.
Yeah, right.
And I mean, talk about being a key player in helping drive business to small businesses in a time where it's really tough for them. That's an awesome little side project to have.
Yeah, it's nice to feel like I'm doing something with this app development skill I've got.
Yeah, absolutely. So the two of us have quite a few interests in common. I love breweries as you do. I was nerdy enough to listen to Constant Variables before I needed to for work. Outside of tech and podcasting, I think we're both interested in biking a little bit. I wanted to end by asking you what kind of biking you're into. Is it road cycling, or do you do any single track mountain biking?
I would like to get into like mountain biking more. I've actually been more into running my whole like adult life basically, and the last couple of years have led my knees to not take it anymore. So
that is what I decided from the start with running.
Nice. Well, I went there. I've done ultras. Like I've I've run
Oh my
really
goodness.
long and far distances, and I honestly prefer it. I'm this morning I actually ran like for the first time under 8 minute mile, like since I had knee surgery 2 months ago. So I'm feeling like I'm getting back into the running itch again. But I think biking is probably a better long term choice, and I've set a goal to do Ragbri in a couple of years.
Oh yeah.
So and if you're listening and you don't know what Ragbri is, it's a race across Iowa, and a race is loose terms. Like basically you like bike from like coast to coast in Iowa, and you stop along the way and basically party every night. So it's not necessarily like a you can make it a competitive thing, but I'm going just to see if I can bike across the state and go with some friends. And so yeah, I'm trying to get into shape for that, and I'm really looking forward to it. But what about you? Like what type of biking are you into?
Man, I will answer you there, but that makes me so happy that you're going to go give Ragbri a try. I was actually born in Iowa, and I have family back there, so I go back to visit fairly frequently. And a
Nice.
few of them have been crazy enough to go through with Ragbri, and it's like a little county fair in every town. It
Yeah.
is so cool each time they come through. I was able to watch them all bike through at one point, and it is a crazy journey.
It like my friend that I went to high school with has done it, I think 7 times now or something like that, and
Oh my goodness.
he's a pro and loves doing it. So I'm gonna go with him, and my neighbors also signed up to do it as well. So we're I got to get into shape, but I have my dad's from Iowa too, and I've got a lot of family down there. So this year they're stopping a night in a town that my family lives in. So I'm like, that would have
Oh
been
my
so cool
gosh.
to be able to do that, but
Yeah.
alas, I am not in bike shape to go across an entire state quite yet, but soon enough.
That's a little understandable. Well, for me, my intro was as a child. I loved biking on the sidewalk and going over our little door and making little jumps for myself. And
Nice.
that segued into the single track mountain biking pretty quickly. So that's always been super fun for me. And I've recently found a lot of enjoyment in more of the cross country type dirt biking, where it's just kind of gentle hills, up hills and down hills. It's a real good cardio workout, but just relaxing and enjoyable through the woods. Um, Road cycling has always been a big interest to me because with mountain bike tires, they're bigger and you generally run them a little lower pressure. So the resistance when you're on the road is a lot, and you go significantly slower than the friends you bike with. So makes commuting around the city a little tougher. I would really enjoy getting into road biking a little bit and kind of exploring that speed and travel across the city.
I've been I live out in a more rural part of Minnesota, of the Twin Cities, and I've been trying to, well okay, it was rural, now it's starting to become pretty suburban, but it's still far enough away from where I work now, that it's like if I were to try to bike in, I'd have to cross the Minnesota River, and there's only like 2 spots you can do that at, and it basically would take like 2 hours one way to get to my office. So it sounds like we're moving offices soon, and I keep trying to convince them to move south of the river so that I don't have to worry about that anymore, and then it can be more of like like a 6 or 7 mile bike ride, which that was when I lived in South Minneapolis, and JMG's office was right off the Cedar Lake Trail.
Oh
There
yeah.
it would take me 45 minutes to maybe 50 minutes on a day I took it a little easier, and that compared to rush hour, it was basically like biking took 5 more minutes. So I used to bike in a couple of times a week into the office, and that was so much fun, and I miss it. So I've been thinking about though getting an e-bike so that I can try to commute and maybe make that a little bit shorter of a time. But we'll see. I know that those are I guess I hear they're a lot heavier than a normal bike. So my fear would be that it would die right as I get onto the other side of the river, and then I'd have to bike up a hill with
With a big old
with a
brick under
battery.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's totally fair. Your commute sounds shockingly similar to mine at my previous job. I was just near the convention center in Minneapolis, for any that know the city. And I also took Cedar Lake Trail over to the west in St. Louis Park to an office that is maybe 5 minutes away from JMG's current office. So we would have seen each other had we gone on similar days.
Oh yeah, I mean, you would have seen me if you would have just gone past further, because I mean, Rob and I would walk that trail all the time, and I'm sure he still does. Like we used to take all of our calls walking that trail, so yeah.
I do hear the crunch of gravel under Rob's feet on calls pretty frequently, and I was told he hops a fence over to get into the JMG office at times. So
yeah,
I do think he's still hiking around there.
He takes the railroad tracks, which I'm still not. There was one time in college I took the railroad tracks and I got busted by Burlington North, like the BNSF railroad company. Like they busted me for trespassing. So I've been more shy about doing that. But I mean, Rob's been doing it for years now, so, and I at least I haven't heard that he's gotten scolded or anything. So and he hasn't been hit by a train either, which is also a plus.
That is amazing. Well, this is not the last time we will have you on the show, Tim. You are an expert on so many things. I'm positive we'll have you back from time to time if you've got room in your schedule. And for anyone that wants to stay connected with you, how should they reach out?
Well, I think that you're paying a little too much lip service calling me an expert on anything. I feel like very much like a jack of all trades, but master of none. But I'm happy to come back anytime you need me. I do really enjoy podcasting, and I really hope that people continue to subscribe to Constant Variables, because the combination of you three at the product and pushing things forward here, I think is going to be a winning combination. So stay tuned if you need my endorsement, and if you want to get in touch with me, I'm pretty easy to get in touch with. I'm on LinkedIn, is probably the best place. You can also go to my website, timbornholdt.com. I have a blog there that I occasionally post articles on, and I also just pretty much hang out there. So so yeah, either LinkedIn or my website is probably the best place to find me.
Well, awesome. I appreciate the time today, Tim. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks for having me, Michael.
A big thanks to Tim Bornholdt for handing the hosting reins over to Michael. As Tim mentioned, you can stay in touch with him on LinkedIn or on his website at timbornholdt.com. And if you'd like to get to know our new host a little better, you can connect with Michael Roth on LinkedIn or schedule a casual chat with him at jmg.mn/chat. You can find the link for that in our show notes, which are at constantvariables.co. You can get in touch with the show by emailing hello@constantvariables.co, and you can follow us on Twitter at CV_podcast. Today's episode was produced by Jenny Karkowski and edited by the ritzy Jordan Doust. This episode was brought to you by the Jed Mahonis Group. Check us out at jmg.mn and sign up for our monthly newsletter at jmg.mn/news.